you very much. Good evening. Welcome to the Audit and Transparency Committee, 9th of November 2020 at 6 p.m. Apologies for, just briefly, in terms of Microsoft Teams, if you've got a question, put your hand up on the screen, and on the, the click button thingy. If I should have some technical difficulties, then Vice Chair David Lindsay will be on hand to take over. I think that's it. So on the agenda, A1, apologies for absence. We have an apology from Councillor Dent Code, who unfortunately can't make it tonight. A2, declarations of interest. Anyone got any declarations of interest?
None. No.
No. Oh, sorry, Cosette, you raised your hand.
I noted that there is principal outstanding from Standard Chartered Bank, and I am an employee of Standard Chartered Bank. Just wanted to note that.
Thank you very much. Noted, Mr. Carver.
Yes, thank you.
Got it. Next on the meeting, right, the minutes, A3, minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of September. So the first couple of pages on your pack. Is everyone happy with those minutes?
I'll raise my hand.
Yep, Liz?
Yeah, okay. I raised an issue that we had an emphasis of matter around valuation uncertainty in the auditor's report. And yet we were signing the letter of rep saying that we were happy with the, the assumptions and accounting estimates are reasonable. And I queried that with Grant Thornton, and they said that we were signing the rep letter on the basis of what was in the accounts. But I just wondered, we've probably signed the rep letter now, if it's worth clarifying that in the minutes, because there is a difference between an emphasis of matter in the audit report and what we signed in the rep letter.
Martin, have you got a comment on that?
I can put that in the minutes, Chair, certainly.
Okay, just give me 2 seconds. God almighty, sorry. Bean sweets have been stored rather close to my study, and they've just been busted going in there.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm shuttling anyway.
Right, Liz. So going back to Liz's comments, can we go back to? Would you like us to go back to Grant Thornton and get clarity on that?
Yeah, and include it in the minutes, because I think
included in the minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
If that's okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Martin, you got that?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, then we're happy with the minutes, aside from that addition, which Martin will put in and circulate. Moving on to A4, which is the Forward Programme and Action Tracker. If I may kick off on there, there's one item missing that was mentioned in the minutes, which was from Councillor Dent Code regarding the Grenfell expenditure and when we can have a review of that.
Thank you, Chair. If I can, so I've spoken with Taryn Eves, who's our Director of Financial Management. The information is readily available. So what we'll do is sit down with you before the next meeting to agree the sort of structure and content of the report, and happily bring that back to the next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments on A4?
Nope.
Any other comments on the action tracker specifically?
Wait, I've got. Oh, hold on.
Sorry, Andrew, you're live. Go for it.
Oh, I'm live. I just put my hand. It's sort of a connected point. I may be behind everybody else on this, but I'm not certain I understand the difference between the gold risk register and risk register. Now, we may have had the gold risk register and I haven't appreciated. So one is, I can get the sense one's more important than the other, but the term gold risk register was unusual to me. And then just connecting it to something later in the agenda, where we had the forward look as to what we were going to consider, I didn't see risk registers or risk management particularly referenced. So I just need clarification what we as a committee looking at as regards risk management, and then specifically someone perhaps just remind me what the gold risk register is.
Yeah, happy to pick that up, Chair, if that's okay. So in the summer, in the July meeting, I think we presented to members the gold risk register. So the gold command is the emergency planning operation that comes into force when there's a major instance. Obviously, the pandemic has been treated as a major instance now.
Okay.
Risk management focus over this period has been on the gold structures, where the risk register is being reviewed every 2 weeks by the gold group, which encompasses the chief executive and the executive directors and the leader and deputy leader, as well as other officers. The strategic risk register, which we've brought to you previously and which we'll bring back to you at the March meeting, and apologies, that's not on the forward plan, it needs to be. For the
right. Okay.
That's a longer look in terms of the sort of the council strategic risks, but we've been focusing, as I'll come on to in the report later, obviously on the COVID and other major incident risks over the past few months.
Okay, so we will be seeing as
you will, yes,
the strategic,
you will.
And that isn't any way lessened in importance and focus.
No.
These gold and silvers. I know.
No, indeed.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the assurance. That comes on the next meeting then.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. So if everyone's happy with that, going to move on to A5, which is the report by the Executive Director of Resources, Treasury Management Activity Report. Hello, Matt.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you, Chair. I'll don't want to keep anyone from their dinner, so I'll delve straight into the important data. If I could just start the committee's attention at 2.5, where we have the current bank rate and projections forward to June 22. So there's nobody really forecasting an uptake in bank rate at the moment, although actually if we look at what's happening in the very, very short end of money and time deposits themselves, they are negative or zero at best in the very short end. There is simply too much money swirling around the system. There's still a bit of value at the towards the longer end, but we are seeing more and more negative yields. Not for us yet, I might add. In regards to WLB borrowing, we do still see a slight pickup in rates over the next couple of years, but a very, very slow and measured increase in gilts, which PWLB rates are priced on. So it's something that we continually keep an eye on, and be part of your borrowing strategy. On to 3.1. Actually, it says the beginning and end of quarter, but actually this is a comparison between March and September, which I like better because it illustrates the point I'd like to raise with the committee. We are now putting more money into money market funds. We listen to this committee and know that there is a real desire that we keep things prudent. So just to put the numbers into some kind of context, we've increased our money market fund exposure as our time deposits have matured, but I'd like to draw your attention to the rate, which has plummeted. So whereas at the end of the financial year, when COVID was in its infancy, 0.5% was a respectable return on money market funds, as at the quarter end of September, high single digits, again respectable. We're now looking at a couple of basis points and probably going to stay at a couple of basis points for the foreseeable future. But they are very, very well diversified and a very, very good place for your cash. Now, ultimately, we do, if we go on to 3.2, we do have to respect the fact that your money market fund allocation as part of your treasury strategy is capped at 150 million. So we've already started looking at opportunities in banks and other local authorities. It's not something that we're doing lightly. We're having a really good think about the transactions we want to do for you, because there's a lot of deals maturing between now and year end. So for the purposes of this quarter, if I could just ask you to turn to Appendix B, you'll see 2 new investments from DBS Bank. And for those of you who don't know who DBS Bank are, that's actually a Singapore bank, development bank of Singapore. So Singapore's AAA rated. DBS Bank themselves, AA minus. For those of you who might not be familiar with what AA minus means, it's like an HSBC. So an HSBC would be a AA minus bank in a very high rated principality. So something that we see as very, very low risk, and actually decent returns if we look at where rates are now in the short end, and a reasonable home for your money. The only other thing I'd like to do at 4 point, if we could ask you to turn back into the main report at 4.3, we are still seeing, as I've already alluded to, that short end money is negative. So there's still this desire for us to keep returns positive. There's things we can do, and there's things we can mitigate against negative returns. We really don't want to be. We will keep positive returns as long as possible. But in regard to the overall asset allocation, I would expect to see, as deals mature, slow 5-10 million deposits in the next few months. With banks up to your limit, and the limit is dependent on the credit quality of the particular bank, and local authorities, which we've started looking at counties and unitary authorities first. But again, small transactions at first. That was all I had tonight. So I'll pause for questions.
Matt, may I start with a question? Do we have a sort of strategy in place if we do get negative interest rates?
Yeah, I mean, it will be. We can't amend this year's Treasury strategy without it being a full council. So we're stuck with what we've got.
Yeah.
There will be mitigation tools in there for next year. Now, if that could take a lot of forms. That could
sorry, this is done in March, isn't it?
Well, you do have the ability, if you take a Treasury strategy in January or Feb to full council, you can ask for it to be adopted immediately. So there is scope to adopt it immediately. But yeah, there's things you can do, and it's very much the wish of Phil and Mike to mitigate against. Yeah.
And what would those mitigations be?
Well, you could do a lot of that. You might be comfortable leaving surpluses in your current account, for instance. It's not ideal, but you could look at doing that. You could look at putting some money in something longer term, because it would only be on volume that you would have these issues. So you might look at something, a cash plus, or some short-term bonds if you want. The easiest and, quite frankly, crudest way is to just up the limits. So just say, okay, we've got a core cash holding of this. We think we're going to borrow this. So you would just set the bar higher. Now you could quite easily put your money market fund allocation 100 million higher. In a prior life, I actually didn't have limits on money market funds. So that's an idea. So yeah, you could just look at the limits of what you've got and look at slowly introducing other stuff. And you've really got to think about that at strategy time, because if it's in the strategy, you've got the flexibility to use it. If you don't put it in, and someone was to decide through the year it's something you'd like to look at, you're then bound by the strategy. I mean, in all my years of doing this, I've had to take one strategy back, and that was because a fund we were invested in got they took risk off the table and got downgraded. So I did have to go back to counselling. But it's not something you should do, really. It's okay. Very much a last resort.
But we are thinking about how we're going to change it and what we're going to do to try and mitigate the impact of negative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. We've got a question from Charles.
Yes, I mean, it's the old chestnut is, why are we both depositing money and borrowing? I mean, I know we're stuck with the PWLB loans, but talking about additional borrowing, wouldn't it be better just to net out, and then we wouldn't have so much money to worry about where we're finding a home for?
Thank you, Councillor. It's always a balancing act, and I think that I will absolutely say that the short-term cost of carry is severe, but on a long enough timeline, if yields rise, it could be financially savvy to take borrowing before rates rise. Now, I totally accept that point, that if it looks like you are, if you're struggling to place money and it's becoming difficult to earn yield, why would you borrow? But that is simply the difference between looking at the short term and the long term. But absolutely, I mean, even if you were to borrow for so HRA loans are 1% below general fund loans, so you could borrow a very respectable 1.5%. Now that actually over 30-40 years is a very, very good, attractive loan to take out. But in the short term, with the market paying you zero, it's a heck of a hit to take. I'm not going to, so it really is a balance.
Okay, so what you're saying is that if it's in the loans are taken up because they reflect long-term commitments, particularly in housing, and that otherwise we'd be at risk of in medium term of a sharp rise in rates.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, it's a question of balancing that risk. Yeah,
absolutely.
A question from Cosette.
Thank you, Chair. I had a similar question, which had two parts. In section 3.1, you've already alluded to the fact that the loans that we already have are difficult to renegotiate, but is there potentially actually an opportunity to do that at a lower rate? And that leads to a follow-on question in section 5.1, where it says the council is planning to borrow £20 million in December. And I was curious to know what the tenor of that loan might be, because clearly then that impacts the rate at which the borrowing will be done. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first part of the question, yes, you can. And there are opportunities in cycles where you can go to the Public Works Loan Board and say, what does it look like if I repay my debt? And there are times when premiums that you have to pay, because if the council takes out a loan, the government takes out a gilt to match that. So the government are stuck paying that gilt off. So there's a gap. And actually,
kind of like paying your mortgage early.
It's exactly the same. And that I've been doing this long enough now that I actually remember a time when there were premiums, because the market went the other way and the government can lend the money out for more. That was so it's purely you get it. The second point, HRA, it's still in the schedule. Are we going to borrow? I don't know. What I would say is we're literally about to appoint an advisor for RBKC on Treasury, which they have not had before, and we'll be having meetings with them in the foreseeable, so very, very soon. I think that 20 million is unlikely. We've left it in because it's in all of the modelling, but unlikely at this point.
Thank you.
David, question for you.
Thank you. Can you just expand a little bit more about what you said about lending to other authorities as and when the current debt might be is going to mature, and the sorts of characteristics, the sorts of criteria you're thinking of? Because I think that certainly as a councillor, I'm aware that we are in a better place than many other authorities, and therefore it would be a concern if we were to lend to others that might be more marginal, and I'm being slightly vague in my terminology deliberately.
The Tri-Borough team actually run a due diligence exercise on every local authority that we do, that we'll do a transaction with, that has to be signed off by the director. If you like, I can send you an example, a specimen due diligence report. We look at things like gearing, levels of borrowing, changes between years. We'll look into the council. It goes beyond the regular ratios. So I do take the point. I work for 3 very good, very solid local authorities, and sometimes you can align the quality of the local with the rate of interest that you're being offered, and I would really I'd just reiterate that it's something that if we have to hold a certain amount in local authorities, there's no immediate renewal with those authorities. So even if we like them last year, it doesn't mean we're going to reinvest. So it is literally a case by case on every single loan. So even if we liked a particular authority last year, doesn't mean to say we're going to roll over. So it's a fresh due diligence report. So it's something we take a lot more seriously. It's actually some councils.
Can I come back?
Of course.
I think Spelthorne district, or maybe larger than that, council in Surrey recently bought a large shopping precinct, which is great if you are a shop there, but possibly not quite so good if you are a council taxpayer, because with COVID, clearly there are going to have been a number of shops there that won't have been able to pay. And I suppose it'd be things like that would be red rag to a bull at such a time as this, that I would want to make sure that we're not invested in.
Absolutely, and I think a quick Google search, there are a handful of examples with investments such as that. I mean, that's hopefully going to be something that's a lot more difficult to do. It's part of the PWLB consultation that if you are, I'm very careful as an officer, I'm not talking about Spelthorne here, but if something is purely a speculative investment, you are prohibited from that. You're prohibited in that financial year from borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board, and it's subjective, because at what point do you deem something that may be regenerative and income producing as purely speculative? Now you could actually say, well, is it in the locality, and that's quite an easy litmus test. But I totally take the point. We know of examples like this, and how they're being financed. So
yeah. I mean, we always give Matt a hard time on local authorities lending. Most audit and transparency committees we have, but I note that it seems to me, and I don't know this for a fact, but the list of counterparties in terms of other councils has changed quite a bit over the last certainly 2.5 years while I've been on there. Is that right? There are different names to what we used to have. I mean,
Yes.
some of the same,
Yeah.
but there is quite a changeover. So what I'm trying to do is emphasise your point that it's not set in stone and reviewed annually.
Absolutely, and we don't all need short-term money at the same time. It's a judgment call. Do you want short-term financing? Either you believe rates might move in your favour, or you genuinely need to plug a gap in the very, very short term. Then dealing within ourselves and our own sort of local authority universe can be cheaper versus the Public Works Loan Board, but it's absolutely not meant to replace longer term deals. So it's as you need it, but absolutely a given that we don't do automatic renewals.
Yep. Mike Curtis, got a question? Or you my point, I assume. Sorry.
No question. I just wanted to say. I mean, I think it's important to say that no local authority has ever defaulted, and it's just important to see it in that context. And I think it's extremely unlikely that would be allowed to happen anyway. That a local authority did default to another local authority, but it has never happened, and I don't think it will ever happen. But notwithstanding that, as Matt said, we do look at. We do the due diligence on the loans, and obviously having the transparency as we have here enables people to look at it and express any concerns.
I don't think the sort of greater worry is default, because obviously there's a backstop of central government, but it would be the liquidity which would worry me slightly rather than the default.
Right. Okay. I mean, I think we have less of a problem with liquidity anyway, but because we have a fair amount of money out there. But,
yeah, and it's all split up. Okay.
But yeah, but we do keep it constantly under review. And I did want to say that about the earlier point as well, as Matt said, that we are keeping the borrowing and the investment under constant review, especially at this time where the position is very difficult because the rates are so low for investment.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Andrew, did you have a?
Well, I think yes. I think a lot of what I was thinking has already been said. I've just encouraged that when we're looking at a strategy, that it's always struck me that the Treasury strategy is very conservative, and then it's become even more conservative when you're just looking at different options. I just would encourage a look at the risk versus and the returns available. So there is a choice between a less conservative and an ultra conservative policy. And I think to me it jars a lot that we are heading into territory of negative returns, and you've probably got to actually just think a little bit carefully at what cost is that cost worth the lowering of the risk that's resulted in that. So anyway, you'll do your strategy review. I would encourage that it was done not necessarily sort of linked to a normal cycle of work within the council. It just seems to me that the landscape has changed very significantly, and we ought to reassess our strategy in the light of that. But we're not a committee that actually decides. I think there are others that actually decide on policy.
But Martin, I think that's a good point to sort of minute Andrew's point that I think as a committee we're encouraging Treasury to review its strategy at its earliest possible date rather than wait for the council timelines.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matt. So if no more questions, we'll move on to A6, which is the anti-fraud half-year report, which Andy's doing this. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very slightly different report than normal, really, to bring to you. It's been a very different first 6 months of the year. the report itself really is to provide up-to-date information regarding the counter-fraud work, and more importantly, to provide you as members assurance that work is being undertaken. Obviously, the first 6 months have been very different. Some of our activities have had to be slightly reduced because of the need to provide the emergency support during the pandemic. You'll note in the report itself that some of my officers were actually redeployed and have been redeployed throughout this period, some supporting the council's COVID hub. Some officers, for example, have been delivering food parcels and also supporting the mobile testing unit when it was in place at Olympia. But throughout that, what I am pleased to say is that the results haven't been dramatically that down, given the fact that we have had officers redeployed and some of the work has changed. But what I am pleased to say is that, you know, we have produced some outputs from this year. We've looked to alternative methods. We have sort of embraced technology to do some data analytics, which has provided us results. We're hoping that we'll be doing more of that over the next 6 months. So it's just really an overview in respect of that as my narration, but happy for any questions regarding the report itself.
Charles, you're first on my list for the question.
Yes, I was going to ask about the parking permit fraud and this data matching exercise done with Westminster, which produced a number of vehicles which had permits for both authorities. I wonder, couldn't this be rolled out across London if all the councils matched their because I guess most of them, like us, say, well, you can only have a permit in one borough, basically. And I'm sort of wondered whether this could be expanded a bit.
Indeed, we actually used the Cabinet Office tool, which is the National Fraud Initiative, and we spoke to them about running this initially as a trial in our local authority and also with Westminster. And funnily enough, they have come back to us and they have asked us to consider trying to put it into a proof of concept for a much bigger exercise, as you say, across London. And we're hoping, unfortunately, when we did it, the timing for collecting data is actually September, and it's just gone, and they're still looking to try and get approval from Cabinet Office in terms of the proof of concept. So it probably won't be rolled out for 12 months, but it's certainly something that's on the agenda, and Cabinet Office have taken an interest in the results that we've identified, and they're very keen to roll this out. So you've already preempted a good idea. It definitely is something that will be moving forward.
I think it's particularly important now that we're doing virtual permits. I think the opportunities for, certainly the temptation to fraud will be increased.
Absolutely. I've seen that in Hammersmith and Fulham. They moved to virtual permits, and it is a real, it sort of slows down some of the civil enforcement officers when they're checking vehicles. It takes away the counterfeit permits, which had been an issue previously, but it does mean that some of those individuals will still take a chance. And unfortunately, you're quite right, it does leave us open. So hopefully we can get this up and running with the National Fraud Initiative to run this on a more regular basis and constantly preventing and detecting fraud in this area.
Thank you.
Liz?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for your introduction. It's a very interesting report. I just wondered how this compared to the prior year. I mean, I appreciate that, or the prior half year, I appreciate that there's been resource constraints, but I think with the pandemic and with increased automation and remote, there's a risk of increased fraud. And I just wondered how it had compared. And the other thing is, in 1.6, I had trouble tying those figures together in the table, because closed investigations add up to 57, but closed to 61, and then positive outcomes 42, but in the next paragraph it's 54. Sorry, I'm an accountant. I'll just check that. Sorry.
Oh, Andy, I think you're on mute.
Not a problem. Perhaps if I initially take the maths question first. Apologies on that. The positive outcome number you'll see is 42. As you rightly pointed out, we've actually recorded 52 on the table at 1.7. What it is because the figures that we've taken for the activity throughout the year have been directly drawn from our case management system. Unfortunately, the 12 successful outputs that arose from the residents parking exercise, they weren't included because they weren't cases that were physically opened on the case management system. So unfortunately, they weren't incorporated. So that's initial one of the areas that you've identified in terms of the discrepancy between positive outcomes in table 1.6 and the positive outcomes at 1.7. Going back to the comparison, I think if we look at the table at 1.7, the areas that I suppose really we haven't got as great numbers are probably linked to the pandemic firstly. So if we look at the high to medium risk fraud, included in there is blue badge fraud, which normally by this time of year we may have prosecuted up to 20-25 individuals, and unfortunately due to the pandemic the courts have not been progressing cases that are deemed not as severe as a blue badge. They're looking at the more serious cases to progress through courts, so there's been a little bit of a backlog on that. Now whilst we have got a number of cases lodged with our legal services, unfortunately they're not being processed through the courts at this present time. The other area which probably doesn't stand out as much, which is tenancy fraud, which is something that's we've really struggled with during the pandemic because of a lot of the local restrictions and not being able to visit and call round individuals' properties to check residency. We got to a point where we had redesigned our standard operating model so that officers could go out and visit properties. Then unfortunately we moved into the second restriction and the second lockdown, so it slowed us back down again. So that's one area. Now, in terms of new emerging fraud risks, I think a lot of our time has been focused on the business grants, which obviously central government provided to support businesses in the area. And with regards to that, we did a lot of work in terms of supporting the check-in, verification and vetting, and hopefully that's helped prevent any fraud in that area, or certainly mitigate the risk of fraud in that area. In terms of some of the other new and emerging risks, I think one of our concerns will be the individual departments and how they operate move into a remote function. Does it mean that some of the controls, the anti-fraud controls that were in place within their processes, have they changed slightly because people are now remote? So wet signatures, for example, even physical security of items. Does that mean that if there was physical security of items, dual control is being removed? And that's what we're hoping to start to employ over the next 6 months and explore looking at that. It will probably need some sort of survey from us because we're going to need to speak initially to service heads to see if they've identified dramatic changes so that we can look at whether they've changed the anti-fraud controls, and if so, start to test the efficiency of those. So I think those are the areas that we certainly will be looking at over the next six months, which I think is an area of risk that needs to be explored. I wasn't sure if your question, you had some specific ideas in mind.
No, I haven't. It was just I was just surprised at the results because I would have expected fraud to have gone up in the current situation. That's all, and what was proposed to address that. Yeah, because you have been resource constrained in the environment. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it doesn't mean that fraud may have been undiscovered because of a slight reduction in our resources, but I don't think we're seeing major frauds at this moment in time, and I'm hoping that we're not. But obviously we've got a second wave of business grants coming through to us shortly, so again there might be new areas and there may be individuals that are going to try to exploit that area as well.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew, question for you. Your hand meant to be up?
No, I don't think it is. Oh, I'm lowering it now.
Okay.
No.
Does anyone else have any more questions for Andy? No, just a quick question for me. In terms of the discretionary business grants, we checked 354 out of 1,288. Was that just a pure sample that we checked, or was there any sort of methodology to the ones we checked?
No.
Andy? We lost you.
Oh, apologies there, seem to have lost me briefly. Yes, the discretionary grants, it was a case of being, again, of deploying risk assessments and identifying those that potentially had the higher or greater risk. We also, because we were using some of the tools from central government, that was also helping us to identify those where there may well be risks. So it was important that we followed and focused our resources on those cases, hence the reason not every single one was put through that system.
Okay. Great. Well, no more questions from me. No questions from anyone else. Thank you very much for your time, Andy.
That's fine. We've got the next paper. I'll keep this brief, Chair. As you know, we like to bring the anti-fraud policies to committee so that committee can review them, and obviously it gives gravitas to those policies, and obviously it's very important that we show to staff that these policies have gone through committee and been scrutinised. Although on this occasion there's no real material changes to the three policies that are presented to you, but they are there, and what I would like to do is obviously note your approval of these policies.
Just a query from my side. You know, I know you said there are no material changes, but it would be quite useful to actually see what changes have been made on here. You know, just a sort of, I don't know, underlining or commentary or something like that, so we could see what has changed since the last one.
Happy to do that for you. On this occasion, there were real minor changes. A lot of it was updating individuals' names and positions on there, or job descriptions. Those were the only real changes on this instance. But I bear that in mind. Something that was mentioned previously is about the whistleblowing policy. Unfortunately, It's got slightly out of line with these three policies. We will bring it to the committee in March. I'll highlight any changes then, but then I will then hopefully get them back into the annual cycle so that all four policies are together.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Right, we've got a question from Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the papers. I just felt that there were some sort of inconsistencies between the various papers. They're addressing anti-bribery, money laundering and fraud. But in the money laundering policy, there's provisions to make staff aware and targeted training, but there's none of that proposed for bribery or fraud. That's my first query. For fraud, there's a manager is responsible for putting in place controls over fraud, but there are no controls for money laundering procedures or bribery to check that's taking place. And also, when I looked through the internal audit programme, I couldn't see any testing in this area of that controls. And also, we get a report, sorry, this is quite a lot, I'm happy to break it down again if you like, that we get a report on fraud incidents, but not money laundering and bribery. And I just wondered, what was the thinking behind those inconsistencies?
Absolutely. If I and forgive me if I do miss any.
No, that's right. It's right.
If I start off initially with the training, you're quite right. I should have really, that probably needs to be teased out in all three policies. I suppose overarching all of these policies themselves is the anti-fraud and corruption strategy, and in the strategy there we talk a lot about bespoke training. Bespoke training is very important so that members of staff don't, it's not just seen as an anti-fraud awareness course, it actually talks about their own work and how it applies to them, and you get a lot more buy-in from there. Sorry, excuse me. So So yes, I totally take that on board, that it probably should be teased out and put in all of the policies together. What I can say is I probably, the report but one, we did report to committee about the anti-bribery policy, where we had identified areas where departments were of higher risk. So, for example, planning department was deemed as a high-risk department, and the whole department had to undertake fraud awareness training and anti-bribery training, including conflicts of interest and especially gifts and hospitality. So that whole department, every individual within that department were deemed high risk, and they've all completed and processed the courses, and they all passed that course, because obviously the courses we provide, we make sure that there is a learning assessment at the end to show that they've understood and taken it forward. So I take your point. I will have a look and revisit these to make sure that we actually carry the same message regarding that training in those instances. Going back to the money laundering and bribery examples, we pull out the whistleblowing. That's really, I suppose, most importantly for transparency purposes, so that you can understand what issues are being brought to everyone's attention. We don't tend to have so many money laundering or bribery incidents, and that would, thankfully, that would fall into a corporate investigation, and they would be reported on. So it's not as if we're not highlighting it. It's probably the fact we just don't have a specific individual section in the report to tease those incidents if they occur out. But if they did, they would be reported on and they would be highlighted in our report. The issue over audit, I may look to my colleagues to see if they can assist with regards to that element being part of the audit plan, and I'll happily look for support from one of my colleagues on that. But I may have missed one of 4 questions. What was the one
there was two on sort of the audit. It was fraud. You have a manager responsible for putting controls in place over fraud, but not for money laundering or bribery. And then the second point is actually the testing of those controls in the internal audit role.
Yep. So the testing I'll come back to, but if I look at terms of the manager and the controls, I suppose in this instance, the reason that generally we talk about controls for managers being responsible for them, rather than talk about individual ones on the money laundering and the bribery, really because not all departments, although they need to be aware of it, they're not always higher risk as others. And it, for example, you'll get some departments that may have no interaction with members of the public, therefore there's very small or lower risk of bribery. And sometimes if I put issues in there about making sure the controls are there, I know I'm going to get a manager saying, what does this mean to me? Why have I got to do it? But that is where we would rather they were looking towards general fraud awareness, so that we will include a subject matter in there regarding bribery, regarding money laundering, and also links to new courses that if they want to delve deeper and understand it more, they are available. Currently, I'm just in the process of taking out e-learning courses, updating them and putting them back onto our own LMS platform within the council called the Learning Zone, so that they're much more readily available for managers to turn to, and also for managers to start using it where they have realised that they've got a concern. They should be using the training to help mitigate the risk by getting their staff onto that course so that they're aware. And that is part of a little piece of work that we're ongoing at the moment. And hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be able to report to you on how that's progressed, who's been undertaking the training and what types of courses have been rolled out.
Okay, thank you very much.
And just on the audit point, so Andy, in terms of his fraud plan, actually has some proactive exercises which are undertaken. So looking at fraud risks, looking at bribery risks, in particular services. But I'll take your point away about how we do perhaps an audit of the corporate infrastructure as well, which would be really helpful to include in the plan going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Charles.
Yes, really sort of leading on from Liz's point on money laundering. How many SARs do we actually make each year typically? And also, is the £10,000 limit on cash payments in line with other local authorities? Perhaps as cash seems to be going out of fashion, it should be lower.
Yes, that's a very interesting point. The guidance of 10,000 comes from the National Crime Agency. It's a figure that they would recommend to us, and I do understand that with the reduction in cash, perhaps we need to review that and consider. But it's something I might need to go back to NCA and get some advice on. In terms of SARS reports, we don't have that many. I'm pleased to say we had, and perhaps that might be something that we look to reporting on in the future. We've had one report with regards to an individual that was looking to reclaim some money from a rent account, which had become very largely in credit. But we did investigate that matter and looked into it closely. We were concerned that it was money that had gone into the rent account only to be taken out for the purpose of laundering. So we made a SARS report, but that came back and they advised us it was clean, there was no further action. And the individual had said they made the payment incorrectly. We did do some further investigation and due diligence, and we were satisfied to release that. The other area where we do get a few SARS is in relation to any concerns over cash payments with right to buys, or depending upon where the money comes from. Absolutely, that's the other area that we do look in. And what we're finding is, if we ask the question, a lot of the time, once the question is asked, people are withdrawing their applications. So it's always a concern that there was a worry there. The most frustrating thing, though, and I may have mentioned this before, was the NCA. When I asked for further support from them with regards to right to buys, they didn't quite understand the local authorities' involvement, because they said, look, if you don't like the customer, get rid of them. And it's not something we can do. It's not something we can do in that respect. We can't just turn customers away. They're our residents. So we do try to make checks on every right to buy application that is made, so that we can ensure that due diligence is taken, and that obviously any purchases that do go through are supported by evidence that the money is correct.
Good. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. David.
Andy, you briefly referred to staff. Can you just give me an understanding? How many staff do you have reporting to you in the different areas?
Right, because we're, well, as a TAF, we've got 8 on our RBKC side. Obviously, we're a shared service, so I have additional officers that support Westminster. No one that's based at Kensington and Westminster works for the Hammersmith side. That's separate. I seem to be the only conduit on that side. So we have 8 officers. Mostly they are involved in tenancy fraud, because tenancy fraud is so resource intensive because of the number of inquiries, the need to get out there to really knock on doors early morning to check if residency and verify who's there. It's quite resource intensive. So probably the way it's split, we've got 4 officers who are constantly involved in tenancy fraud, and the others will have a mixed caseload that will involve corporate, residence parking, disabled parking. On the disabled parking, we have 1 designated officer, and that's their primary role, is to investigate disabled parking fraud.
Great. Any further questions for Andy? Or he really is off the hook?
Yes, I have a question, please.
Oh, sorry, Cosette, I can't see you on my screen. No, right, sorry. There we are. You popped up now with a question. Go for it.
Thank you. I had comment particularly on the anti-money laundering policy, and I wanted to direct you to Section 8 within it. In Section 8.2 in particular, it specifies, do not tell the customer about your suspicions. Now, since this is not a regulated industry, it is not a crime as it might be, for example, in a bank. However, you still do have opportunity to be criminally prosecuted for tipping off, even in a non-regulated industry such as this. In particular, the crime would be the prejudicing of an investigation.
Yep.
Therefore, and I see you nodding your head there, and you do actually make reference to this all the way down at the bottom in the appendix. So my question, therefore, is, would it be a good idea to include reference to that in section 8.2 in the main body. Sometimes people don't read appendices.
Yeah. No, I take that on board. That's a very good point, actually, because yes, it is an issue. We're not a regulated body, but obviously we still want to follow best practice and we still want to safeguard our members of staff. So yes, I think it's something that can be teased out. And as I'm looking at this, I do apologise. I just see my numbering on the document is slightly out as well. So I will review that to incorporate that and have it sort of teased out so that it really jumps off the page, and also then get the numbering correct as well.
For the avoidance of doubt, I mean the first section 8.2, not the second section 8.2.
I guess. I guess the point.
And just one follow-up question. Just above it in section 7.3, there's a reference to what happens if cash exceeds the amount of £10,000. It would not be accepted, which of course begs the question: what happens below that amount? Because in my experience, a lot of money laundering happens well below the £10,000 limit.
I think the reduction in cash transactions has helped that. The removal of our cashiers that were there at one time to receive payment. The bigger areas of risk at the moment are certainly the rent accounts, and I've had specific training sessions with those officers, and they're very good in alerting to me to where they are areas of concern. That's one, certainly it's been deemed a big area of risk for us. We've also, and they're fully aware anyways, legal services who have a much more holistic approach to seeing what large-scale transactions are taking place, and most of the work that they undertake, the money will be coming in via a solicitor, and obviously there's responsibilities on the client solicitor to make sure that they are following the due diligence and know their customer. So I'd hope that we've got it fairly well sort of now down, although the point you make, and also the point that councillors before have made about the 10,000 limit, perhaps we should review that and see if it's an area to come down anyway, given the changes to working with cash transactions.
Thank you. And then obviously that ties back to points already made about controls and audit plans and things, but that limit is something that I would suggest you at least consider.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have we got that minuted, Martin, for consideration, that £10,000 limit? I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. If no more questions, thank you very much, Andy. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Moving on to A8. Are we having Moira doing this? Or yeah, yes. There she is. Pops up on my screen. Report by shared services. Progress report on internal audit work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Like some of the other reports, this is a little bit lighter than usual, which is pleasing in some ways, but a bit worrying in others, because obviously we're a little bit behind on the plan. Similar to Andy's situation, a number of the staff were involved in other activities at the beginning of the year, and we were very mindful as well of the need for the service areas to focus on the COVID response rather than our internal audits. However, that being said, we do have a plan in place. We are working very well through it with a lot of work in progress at the moment. So unfortunately, there were only 2 audits to report finalised in this period, which is also a very short period since the last committee, if you recall, Chair, it was only in September. Unfortunately, one of those was limited assurance, which was the direct payments. That audit actually started last year, the very tail end of last financial year, and it did take quite a long time to actually pull together into a final report, because there are a lot of people involved in that area, and it is a by-borough service as well. So obviously we were looking at across the 2. One of the we've had problems with direct payments before, because it is a complex area. People are given the provision to be able to get their own services, and they're meant to be monitored to make sure that they're actually getting what they're paying for. And not a lot of information. It's quite hard sometimes to get them to give you the information so that you can be satisfied that that's what they're doing. There's an assessment process, and it all has to blend in very closely together, and there's a lot of people involved in this. And so one of the things that we have found is that there needs to be better understanding of who's responsible for what to make sure these processes are followed. And like Andy asking me to support him on his anti-fraud areas, Andy supports us quite a lot on things like direct payments, because there have been frauds in the past where people have received money which they shouldn't have, or for things that they shouldn't have. So it's an area that needs a lot of improvement, and obviously we'll be following that up. The aim is to follow that up before the end of the financial year so that you get some a good response on that. The other audit that was completed was obviously in the bank reconciliation area, which is another complex area, which the council had to take back responsibility for after the Aggresso system was moved to the IBC system. And to be honest, they've done pretty well to get it working very effectively, and it was a very pleasing report. Other than that, I'm quite happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Maura. Yeah, we've got a few questions coming in. Cosette.
Thank you, Chair. It was really pleasing to see this work being done, particularly given the times that we're in. The commitment to it is really, really good to see. I did have a couple of questions for you, please. Yep. With regard to the audit that had limited assurance, on page 4, it references at the very end that a follow-up review is planned for February 2021, clearly because of the limited assurance status. Yeah. I had 2 questions for you with regard to this. The first is, who is accountable for overseeing the work and demonstrating progress by that date? And will this committee get an update on how that's progressing and whether it's going according to plan at that time? I also have a question about the other audit, but I'll pause and let you answer this one first.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. So yes, I mean, the timing of that follow-up is partly to make sure we get it reviewed within year, because we like to see the whole picture of the year before we do our annual report, obviously. And also it is to do with timing of implementation of recommendations, because some things take a little bit longer to do than others. But it is very much tied in with their response to the audit. And we've already made it clear that we'll be making contact with them pretty much straight after Christmas, so that we can get this booked in. So there are a number of people responsible for different areas here. And as I said, there's finance people involved. There are people who are actually assessing the people who need the care, who are getting the payments to get the care and the support that they need. So it has to be a blended approach. I mean, ultimately, it's a difficult one, because we had to report to the director of adult social care as well as finance, because it's actually kind of managed in 2 places. So it's making sure that happens, that conversation happens, and that those people are working together to get the right outcomes. So ultimately it will be within those 2 directorates, but that they are fully aware that we are expecting to report back to the committee. We're reporting to the committee is limited in the first place, and that we will be reporting back to the committee on the progress made. And Westminster will be getting the same report, because it's a by-borough service.
That's great. Thank you for that. Moving on.
May I make a point, Cosette, before that?
Of course, please.
It is. I mean, it makes a quite concerning reading. Should we have the director of adult social care actually come to our next committee meeting to report directly to us on this?
I think they both should. If they're both accountable, they both should be here, especially if anything slips with getting things done by February.
Yeah.
Yes.
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 Okay. Yes.
Okay, great. Martin, can you minute that? And let's make some people accountable. And then I've no doubt we'll have a wonderful report by then, and they'll be able to
I hope so.
report back in glowing terms, and you'll be able to agree with it.
Ian?
May I move on to my second question,
Yes, you may.
Chair? My second question has to do with the other audit, and then goes down into a more general point about the plan and the way it's presented. In the summary on page 10 of the paper, where it talks about bank reconciliation satisfactory assurance, it says at the end, recommendations have been accepted by management, but it doesn't give any indication as to when the recommendations will be completed. And that leads to a follow-on point in general, which may not be yours to answer, I'm not sure. But how do we see aging for outstanding actions in general for audits?
Okay, on that particular point, I have to admit this is a timing issue. So the report was out for consultation and response, and the response was due, but it was after I had to produce this report for committee.
I see.
So I came to a compromise with the team, which was that we could include it, but we couldn't give them any timescales because they hadn't yet had the opportunity to firm that. So that's. I believe that the response is now due. I think it's actually due tomorrow, which is, quite strange. So, we will get firm deadlines. And again, we will build that into our reporting. We do normally report on follow-ups. Unfortunately, there haven't been many. If there's a problem with an area not responding and not implementing recommendations, that gets reported to yourselves as well.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Next question, Councillor Williams, Charles.
Yes, actually, I was really picking up on because that's an excellent point about the direct payments, because I have quite a lot of experience in the adult social care area. I mean, how high did you go in your discussions after you completed your work within the adult social care directorate? I mean, have you had direct discussions with the executive director?
Not with the executive director, but as high as I think they've got a new director of social care. Yes, I think it was that area. Yes, I mean, this is, I think, was implied by the discussion a moment ago that, I mean, where it's recommendations are like this, I mean, you do need the top management to buy into them. Yes.
So yes, it's important. I think she is understand she is responsible. Thank you.
And I did make her aware of the report and the fact that it was going to both the Kensington and Westminster Audit Committees as a limited assurance report. I would say that I'm sure she'd be more than happy to come and discuss that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Question from Liz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your report. My queries are, first of all, in relation to the direct payments. I note that there were sort of 13 recommendations and you've listed 8. I assume these are the high and medium priority recommendations that you've listed, where there are errors, yeah?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
But what I was concerned about, that if you look over on page 4, on the second bullet, sample testing identified in 12 out of 20 cases. That to me seems incredibly high. And I just wondered if you could add more colour to that. I mean, was that how was that sample of 20 selected where financial reviews had not been undertaken? That would just concern me.
Obviously, when we're doing a piece of work like this, we have to do a limited amount of testing, but we get management reporting and we use that to base our samples on. The actual specific on that, I'm not 100% sure how we got that, but it's not unreasonable to take about 20 cases and then to pick every nth one or whatever, or maybe by value, or it could be based on dates. It really depends on what the test is that you're doing. One of the frustrations that we did find is that we were working quite well in another area where the financial sort of assessments team were going to be working much more closely with the social care team to make sure they were involved in financial assessment work at an earlier stage. And COVID happened and lots of things changed very quickly and they had to refocus their resourcing. So I'm not saying that would have impacted on the ones we looked at because we were looking at before then, but yeah, it is quite high.
It is high, yeah. And also in relation to the bank reconciliation, you say monthly bank reconciliation reports should be produced, which should be reviewed and approved. And what I wasn't clear about, I mean, is this a case that bank reconciliations are not being done, or is it a case that they're just not being approved and reviewed?
They were actually, I believe, at the time we did the audit, being done every 2 months.
Right.
But we felt that they should be every month.
Yeah.
And I don't think there was evidence. So the second point was that there was no clear evidence that they've been reviewed. So we're saying that not only should they be monthly, but you need to show you've done them as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. David Lindsay.
This is for you, Ian. I absolutely agree with you that we should have Bernie Flaherty come. Could we have a finance manager as well who reports to her?
I need to identify the specific person in finance who looks after the direct payments team.
Yeah, but it would be her, but it would also be the finance person who reports to her.
Yes.
She should have someone on her leadership team who reports to her, who's responsible for finance.
Thanks, yes. Thanks, Maura. Andrew.
Hang on.
You're on.
I'm on, okay. Well, again, a lot's been said before, but I just listening to the debate, reading the text, possibly the wording in the direct payments report isn't hard-hitting enough. So I was particularly surprised that you can run a department without a strategy, or a strategy still in draft form, and had been so since 2018, and it's not available for review. That doesn't sound good to me at all. And it'll be pleasing to see whoever's responsible to answer why that's so. 2018 is 2 years ago.
That's when we last did the audit there.
So I think the wording could have been stronger. You've given us the information. And the second thing is the bank reconciliation stuff is all very fundamental. And I just wonder, again, whether you've just been strong enough in the wording of the report. So you've told us in answer to a question, yes, the reconciliation is being done, but on a 2-monthly rather than, perhaps I would have expected a monthly cycle. And I would have thought it's fairly factual to determine whether it's been reviewed or not, and the evidence. So again, just a slight, a bit of feedback from me. So tonally, possibly not as strong as I think perhaps some of the exceptions would warrant.
Okay.
So we're going to have somebody back, but is there any explanation how you can run what you say is a complex area without a strategy, and then also have exceptions at the detail level? I think we ought to have zero intolerance of that.
I think the lack of the strategy actually then shows in the overall opinion of the audit, which is limited assurance.
Yeah.
So again, the people there trying to do their best, but actually there are lots of issues which we've raised during the audit, which we've flagged up, and which it's good that action's being taken. But I think the absence of strategy is one of those things that Mr. Ling's pointed out would have been helpful in the first place.
Has there been a change in officers there in the last 2 years? Is that normally causes these sort of issues, or not?
They changed the way they did things, I think.
But not a change in personnel?
Some. There will be some, yeah.
Good. Well, it sounds like a great area to delve into. Thank you very much.
People responsible in March.
Yeah.
Chairman?
Yes.
Yes, just on the question of the bank recs. Yes, I also think monthly bank recs are rather important. And I wonder if the Director of Finance and Resources could respond.
Absolutely.
I think he's here tonight.
Well, there we are.
Yeah, we can accept that recommendation. I think we've accepted the recommendation, haven't we? So it was just as was said earlier, because the new system was being set up, you need to go through these processes to get it right, and perhaps in the first instance. So that's accepted.
Are you happy with that, Charles?
Yes. I'm sure you'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Thank
any
you.
further questions before we let No, Andrew, your hand's up, but I assume that was your old question. Maybe not. It is. Excellent. Thank you very much, Moira.
Thank you.
So moving on to A9. Is Taryn doing this or are you doing this, Dave?
No, I'm doing this, Chair. Yep.
You're taking Taryn's glory. So risk management update specifically on COVID-19.
Yeah. So thank you, Chair. So this is a follow-on report from the one we provided to you back at the July meeting, where we talked about the financial impact of COVID, as was known at the time, the Council's approach to managing risks during the pandemic, and the way in which the gold risk register was being maintained to track COVID-related risks. So the first part of this report on pages 2 and 3 sets out an update on the current financial impact on the Council, as at the date of writing, so that's about a week and a half ago, with a general fund budget pressure of around 41 million. That's a loss of income and increased expenditure, a £2 million pressure on the housing revenue account, and expected losses of around £3 million on the collection fund. Section 3.3 sets out the support received from MHCLG, and Section 3.4 sets out the financial risks the Council's facing this year and into the future. Then the second part of the report, in Section 4, provides an update on the ongoing arrangements to manage risk as the pandemic continues. And in 4.2, we set out the further actions that have been taken place. So Section 2 sets out the ongoing 4.2 sets out the ongoing response. But I just wanted to update you verbally on some of the actions that have been taken in the last week in response to the government's announcement on national restrictions. So the Council has reactivated the hub, which is providing support to those who are identified as shielding in the first wave. And that's been reopened. Staff have been trained and are in place now to provide support to those who are identified as clinically extremely vulnerable by the NHS. A food shopping service has been stood up so that those who are unable to get to the shops to get their food can have that delivered for them. The local test and trace arrangements are in place and are working really well, where we're supporting the NHS who are doing the national test and trace system so that we follow local contacts through. And I think we're at about 85 to 90% now of contacts between the NHS and the local test and trace that's happening. There's further capacity being built into local testing, which was a problem around a month or two ago. So there's an additional site being explored in addition to the Malton Road site, which is now in place. Our enforcement teams continue to work to make sure there's good compliance with the new restrictions, and they work closely with the police where new enforcement actions are required. And then in line with the travel restrictions, obviously staff who are not frontline staff, who are not required to come into the borough, are working from home and continue to do so. And our council buildings, again in line with what's happening in terms of the guidance from last week, are open to staff but are closed to residents who can access services via the call centre or the council website. There is a separate note which I'll send out to you after the meeting, which provides some more detail on that particular part of the update. So, as was raised by Mr. Ling earlier, the Gold Command structure has been maintained throughout the summer with a regular focus on COVID risks. And Section 4.3 of the report set out a number of new risks identified by Gold since the report we brought to you in July. As we headed into the autumn, Gold agreed to broaden the risk register that was being reviewed every 2 weeks to incorporate risks posed by other potential major incidents. Now, these are ones which are already in the strategic risk register, so thinking specifically about the risk of another pandemic in terms of a winter flu pandemic, and also the prospect of a no-deal transition from the European Union. So these are the potential for these risks to come together at the same time and amplify the impact on residents in the borough, and particularly those who are vulnerable, is something we very much need to take into account, as is the council's capacity to respond to these incidents if they occurred at the same time. So, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic and a winter flu pandemic would impact quite significantly on people like environmental health, public health, and frontline adult social care and children's social care services, for example. So what we've done is reviewed and made sure that all those risks are taken together in the Gold Risk Register. And we've got some themes we identified in Section 4.4.5 and 4.6 in the report. And these focus particularly on the need to make sure we have good business continuity plans in place, both within the council and with our suppliers. So I'm just going to pause there and happy to take any questions on the report.
Question from David Lindsay.
Ian, thank you. David, my question is this. There is a national risk register, I understand. Has it been updated since the beginning of COVID? And to the degree that it has our risk register been updated locally?
So we certainly take account of the London Risk Register, which is in Appendix 1. I've provided to you the high-level summary for the London Risk Register. Now, this was put together before the COVID pandemic actually struck. But you'll notice, actually, even before COVID, in the top right-hand corner, the highest, or what was considered the highest risk across London was the pandemic influenza. So again, what we've done is we've used, and then the executive management team have taken account of this risk register, which the chief executive also reviews on a regular basis, to make sure we have covered anything that's on this London risk register as well.
But there was one word that I used that you slightly used a different word. I used national and you've used London.
Yes, so I'm happy to pick up on separately on the national one. Is that, are you talking National Government Risk Register, Councillor Lindsay? Yes. Okay, so that's something we'll pick up on, and we can certainly make sure is taken account of going forward.
If you could, that would be
absolutely, yeah, no problem at
all. Question from Cosette.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for an interesting update, and of course the situation continues to change as we speak. So a tremendous amount of detailed focus that is clearly being done. I had two questions for you. The first is in section 3.3.1, where it talks about the support received in mitigations, but says there remains a shortfall. Indicatively, how big is that shortfall, please?
So, and Mike was on the call as well, but certainly in terms of the section we were talking about, 3.2.2, the pressures for this year being £41 million on the general fund.
So it's simple subtraction then. Okay, thank you. All right, that's helpful.
I mean, it is changing all the time.
Yeah, of course.
That's the problem. And obviously having this next lockdown probably will put the figure up again, but it had prior to that it had gone down. But so it is difficult because we're trying to obviously to project for the whole year the impact, for instance, of loss of parking income, loss of commercial income. But all I can say is overall, with the government support we've got, with the fact that we've got a strong contingency and strong reserves, we think the position is I don't want to say good, but I think our position is strong, and that we're able to deal with this second wave financially as well.
Thank you. And yes, that's noted. My second question is in section 4.3.2 in the table that is there, and I had two clarifying questions for you, please. In the second risk, non-COVID-19 surge of demand for adult social care, there is a bullet point which says ongoing monitoring of hospital discharges compared to similar times last year to see if there is any impact. My question here is, if there is, what happens next? And then I have a follow-up question for the risk below it as well, but I'll pause.
So colleagues in adult social care are monitoring this information on pretty much a daily basis, and they're looking to see where alternative provision can be put in place if it's needed, if there's a spike in demand.
I see, thank you. It may be helpful to include that.
Yeah, appreciate it.
What's written here.
Yeah.
And my last question is below it, COVID-19 outbreaks in care homes. The first bullet says daily monitoring of all residential care homes. Presumably that's for COVID-19 outbreaks.
It is. So there have been throughout the pandemic those sort of daily conversations with care homes, and there's an outbreak management team that focuses specifically on any incidents which occur in individual care homes, and they are supported by colleagues from public health, the NHS, and from the local authority adult social care teams to make sure that they're dealing with any particular outbreaks, but also they've got the appropriate mitigations and PPE and risk assessments and so on in place?
I think it might be helpful in that first bullet to say what you just said and connect to the rest of it there.
Yeah.
Because then it's actually quite a powerful collective of activity
Indeed,
to mitigate that risk. Thank you, Chair.
Andrew? You're on mute.
Oh, yes. I've said, thank you for the report. Very interesting subject, and we can go well beyond our brief. But just one question which just struck my eye. On the schematic on page 10, local contact tracing is right at the bottom. Does that get enough profile in the council?
So
it's a nationally led programme, isn't it?
Yes, I suppose it's a bottom-up approach in terms of the phrase that's being used quite a lot by environmental health and others is boots on the ground. So I suppose this is the actual operation of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So it does get a lot of focus. So the silver and gold meetings that are taking place weekly, there's a regular item on local contact tracing and public health report on the performance of the local contact tracing function each week. And it's been monitored on a daily basis by public health colleagues.
Okay, it's just that the impression of a reader is that the box is small and it's at the bottom.
Sorry, I suppose neither are indicative of the seriousness or the scale of the operation. I suppose it's a good point there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that reassurance.
Cosette, your hand's up. Is it up again, or is it original hand? It's down. Does anyone have any further questions for David? No. Then that, I believe, is everything done. Thank you very much, David, Maura, Mike for joining the call, and all other officers. Some really good reports there. And although a smaller pack than usual, I think it gave us quite a lot of things to think about. I'm just wondering on that, in terms of any other business, the Grenfell report, I wonder whether it would be helpful. We need all committee members to be satisfied that you're producing a report that they want to see.
Yeah.
Whether you could email the committee a sort of structure of what you recommend that report to be.
Yeah.
And then everyone can put their comments on there. I wouldn't want you to sort of, do a report and then redo it, etc. So at least everyone can agree what the terms are.
Happy to that, Chair. Yep.
And then we can get that done in March. And I think that's it from my side. But thank you very much to all officers. Thank you to our members, and particularly to our new members, Cosette and Liz, who are really getting into their stride now. And I think those of us who are involved in the interviewing are basking in the reflected glory, taking on two terriers onto this committee. I think it's such an important committee, and it does need robust questioning from learned people. And I think we're doing a good job. Only to get better. I
thought the expression was bloodhound.
Well, yes. Well, I don't know. But whatever you'd like to use, David. I've got one complaint that David Hughes has not started to regrow his lockdown beard.
Apologies, Chair. I was under severe pressure in September to have it removed, but I did miss the barbers. So I might be growing a mullet for November, possibly. That might be.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely evening. And
you too. Thank you.
One last question. Meeting date. So you've we've moved a meeting from the 22nd to 29th of July. I've put 29th to 29th. The question, two points. One is that I could have difficulty committing to that. So with an optimistic look on next year. Perhaps things are back to normal and it's sort of in holiday season. But secondly, is there any view as to whether the meetings, if we get back to a more normal way of working post-COVID, are we just still going to have provision for joining meetings by video conference, etc.? Is there any thought being given to that?
I mean, I'll give you my view. And my view is you've kind of got to work to, I'm trying to think of the right word, the sort of lowest common denominator. So if there is someone in the committee who is vulnerable and should be shielding, should we have the meetings in person if that person cannot attend physically? I think that's the kind of overarching line in the council. Obviously without their agreement, I suppose. You know, this just came up in discussion at council meetings. If you've got 50 councillors there and one person is shielding or is vulnerable and there's still a risk of COVID, should you be having those council meetings in the council chamber? It's very difficult. I see no reason why, because I do it in a business context all the time, we can't have these committee meetings where some people are present physically and some people are not. I think it would be a good use of expenditure of council's funds to ensure we have the facilities to do that in the various committee rooms in the council. I don't know who one speaks to about that, but who knows?
Yeah. I just add, Chairman, I think during the summer the council was looking to moving to a hybrid format, as it's called, for some meetings, and of course that has been knocked on the head by the resurgence of the virus. But we are also governed by what the government allows us to do. Yeah.
What? So we can go back to all meeting in the pub, but we can't.
Well, no. I mean, if the government might say yes, if you want to continue online or a hybrid system where some members are physically present but others are not. Yeah. You can do so. But of course, we don't know what the government's rules will be by July.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have got some IT capacity for it, and are going to enhance that IT capacity for it. But it is it does depend on what the rules are, obviously, and they do keep changing. So,
so we can't. So will you be sort of zooming in from the south of France, Andrew, on the 29th?
I don't know. I was just musing on that. I think the meeting change is fine, but it does come into the holiday period, and it may be that I and others can't attend. And I think it's just one of these things that involved in other places. It has made us think about how we run meetings. That's all.
Because just on that, I mean, we can't really move it forward because we've got one on the 22nd of June. Okay. Then looking at it from this point, presumably we're going to be late on the audit. So 29th of July, you know, the sort of headline really is the sort of internal audit progress report, external audit reports and statement of accounts. I mean, then you've really got.
Well, maybe it's September. I don't know. I'll just leave it as a question.
And then you've got a meeting on the 16th of September. I don't really know what to suggest. Anyone else got any ideas?
Look at it at our next meeting.
Okay, let's do that. Martin, would you be able to pencil that in as a reminder to have a look at that again by March? We may or may not have a clearer idea, and then we can make the call then.
And then Ian, the annual council meeting is when you're meant to lay out the year ahead.
Yeah.
Meetings. So if we discuss it in March, that will be covered for May.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Great. Sorry, I missed that bit out, Andrew. Great. Right.
Good night.
Anything else from anyone else?
Good night.
Okay.
care.
Lovely evening.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.